Hey, this is Dave Hollis. I just got off the Resilient Minds podcast with Eric Balance. We talked about pushing ourselves out to sea so that we can challenge growth, find fulfillment, and unlock the gifts that we were intentionally designed for. Check out our podcast when it comes out. It's a fantastic conversation. I promise you'll enjoy.
Welcome everybody to the Resilient Minds podcast. I'm really excited and inspired today to, really introduce a powerful and amazing human being that is doing brilliant things out in the world. Mr. Dave Hollis here. He's a New York Times bestselling author, host of the popular Rise Together podcast, a keynote speaker, and a life and business coach on Growth Day. Dave's history really includes the CEO of media startup, former president of sales for the film studio Walt Disney, talent manager across film, TV, and music, and he's worked in publicity, research, and technology in the entertainment sector. So I'm really inspired to share a little bit about entertainment because there's so much that we as creative beings, I believe, are artists and are excited to always create. And coming from, such a background, Dave, I think that's going to be a lot of fun. If there's anything that you feel inspired to add right now, I think it would be amazing for you to share a little bit of things that are going on in your life currently, especially right now with all of the noise going around in the world. Please, Dave, welcome, brother.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Love the idea of just having a conversation, talking about all the things. I mean, I'm a father of 4 human beings, probably first and foremost. I have 3 boys and a daughter. I happen to also be an adoptive father, and that my daughter is adopted. I'm a 4-time foster parent. So my family, my kids, they're going to be my number one. And when I think about what's your reason for doing the things that you do, a big part of it ends up being honoring how I hope to show up well for them. I'm a human who has a close relationship to God. And if you ask me, what is your definition of success? Truly attempting to honor the intention of my creator every day. Hey, I've been given these gifts. How can I, on this day, the only day I can control, show up as best I possibly can to match the hope in how I was created with deliberate design and how I show up today. That's how I get as close to success as I possibly can. I'm a runner. I find myself using fitness in so many ways now as a positive coping mechanism. And so wellness and fitness, running has become a huge part of my life as well. In addition to the ridiculous list of accolades, it's nice to hear somebody else say something about you that you wouldn't want to have to necessarily say yourself. So thank you, Eric, for that nice introduction.
Bless you, brother. I'm really excited. Here on the Resilient Minds podcast, I always talk about these powerful, amazing creators, how we've been through so many different experiences in our life and how those experiences have really contributed to our big purpose, our big why. And I love that you brought up the creator and our divine, beings within ourselves and how our connection to the divine is so important. Because I totally resonate with that. For me, that's been something that has always been the further, the next step of how can I get closer to God, to the creator, to really understand the divine, and realizing that so much of that is within us, right? So, and through our experiences, those lessons, continue to come up and show up, and we really have to utilize them to magnify our whys, our purpose in this world, and live life on purpose, right? It's so much more fun, right? On purpose.
For real. What's interesting is I find myself at one of the best places of my entire life, having come through some of the harder things I've ever experienced in my life. And in the last 4 years or so, having transitioned out of a corporate job into entrepreneurship, having gone into business with my now ex-wife, to having our relationship transition from married to divorced, there have been a series of things I would describe as leaving a harbor of safety or security for the possibility of growth that happens out at the choppy waters beyond the jetty that you may be familiar with. And as much as there were times where I chose to leave the harbor, right? I decided to leave the president of sales at Walt Disney to go and pursue something different, right? I left my career for my calling. And in doing it, it was, man, choosing to be uncomfortable and leaving something I knew and could do well for the promise of failing and the promise of being exposed to my insecurities and my imposter syndrome and everything else. And yet, so much growth came. And there have been, like 2020 for most of us, plenty of instances where I wasn't choosing to leave the harbor. The leaving the harbor chose me. And I was now pushed out to sea and having to, in the midst of that chop, get my sea legs and understand what it means to become the captain of my own ship out there on those choppy waters. And when it comes to the divine, I'm going to bring it full circle just for 1 second.
Oh, I'm hearing you. I'm catching this. This is amazing.
In the midst of a few of my lower points, right? Like I had a bit of a midlife thing that precipitated me deciding to leave Disney, where I was like, man, I am stuck. I'm struggling. I have a job that from the outside is a job that most people, admire and that I ought to be happier with. And yet the conditions of that job, because of how strong the intellectual property was and how great the teams were, I wasn't having to study very hard to get straight A grades. And there was something that felt disconnected in purpose and fulfillment. And I started devolving into a lesser and lesser version of myself, getting in my own way, was drinking more than I should have. I just didn't feel great. And I can remember at one point in the midst of this stuck, just like on my knees, like, God, send me a miracle, like send me something. How can you help me? How can you fix me? And in a way that was probably the clearest I have ever heard a conversation back from this God that I believe in, the voice was like, you are the miracle. You have the tools inside of you. No one is coming to save you. I have already equipped you and qualified you to handle every single thing that you are going to experience. So get up, brother. Like, don't wait for someone to throw a rope into the ditch. Start creating a ladder. And so there was something in that moment that was a switch flip that all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay, I got to approach this in a different way. I have to actually do the work and embrace that who I'm hoping to become is not going to happen in spite of the conditions that are beyond my control, but because of the conditions that are beyond my control. And if I can see pushing into these spaces that are super uncomfortable and really challenging and break down the muscle to build it back up, that I will in fact actually become stronger on the other side. But I have to see it as such and walk toward it every single day, even though it requires facing fear, even though it ends up being an uncomfortable kind of a situation. And there's been beauty in it, right? I mean, so many people came through 2020 where the world had normal completely ripped away from us. And there are, I'm sure, certain people that are just still stuck waiting for normal to come back. And there is no return to that normal. There's a new normal. And either you're experiencing something of post-traumatic stress or you're experiencing post-traumatic growth. And those that can see the obstacles and the challenge and the discomfort as the vehicle to becoming who you'd hope to be, well, they're the ones who evolve and become. And every single day, if you can, get a little closer to that intention of the creator in the first place.
Oh, brother, I love it. So powerful, so powerful. And it's like, like when you said the rope, right? Like waiting for the rope, like, hold on a second. I got the ladder within me to be able to go out there and make it happen and like create from that place. And like, to me, that's so important. And it helps me recognize so much of my own journey, right? Because we are, for so long, I've believed that I was a victim of circumstance, a victim of what was going on around me, and that once that shift happened because of all the lessons and doing the work, because the work is super powerful and important, and spending time like digging deep within, it allows us to really recognize that we are the creator of our circumstance, right? Like it becomes so much more exciting to live that way. and rather than this victim mentality that's often being cultivated outside of the realms that I believe that some of us are in. And I think that having going back to hindsight's always 2020, right? Like, but going back and we get to see wow, that experience was really powerful, and it led me into purpose. It led me into who I am. And the other day I shared something around, I've taught myself a lot of things, because it's easy to blame, right? It's easy to blame, society or conditioning and all of a sudden, but taking responsibility of like the teaching of ourselves, and then the recognizing that we're teaching ourselves the wrong thing, and taking responsibility that we're unlearning the teaching now and teaching ourselves to become who we actually are, which I believe is like stepping into this grace, into our heart. That was like a massive shift, because I was always running away. I was always running away from who I thought I needed to be, right? And I was wearing this mask. So once those experiences showed up in my life, that mask was slowly able to crumble away, was slowly able to walk away, and I was able to fully step into my essence, my sovereign, And so stepping into your own sovereign, because there's a lot of things that you touched on, about like certainty and security, this amazing job, right? Which comes from a creative perspective where you're around so much creativity, right? Which and allowing people to be playful in that essence, like Walt Disney, are you like, there's so much playfulness there, right? But you decided, regardless of all of that, to step into on purpose. So my question is like, how did that all contribute today to this new purpose-filled life that you continue to bring, right? And not by pushing but by like accepting and receiving.
Yeah. Well, I wish I could say that it was me knowing that there were benefits to doing the things that have happened in the last 4 years ahead of time. Part of it was I was stuck. I was in a bit of a funk. I needed to do something that would mix things up. And it wasn't until I took a first step and saw, oh, there's something here, that it gave permission to do something else. And a lot of those somethings were challenging the stories that I had believed of what it would mean for me to be a good man or a good dad or worthy or enough or whatever it might be against some societal construct or the way that other people's opinions may validate or affirm me. And once I was able to start making decisions that were about listening to my intuition or staying connected to what felt like calling from God, and not so much the dogmatic, here's how you should be to, be seen as acceptable or to maintain a status quo or not ruffle any feathers. When I started doing stuff that felt like it was for my truth and not so much for pleasing, I felt more connected to myself. I felt more connected to my creator. I felt more connected to my purpose. And what I also realized was that I was believing stories and giving weight to them and programming from my childhood or my family of origin or the church I grew up in or whatever it might be, that when I deviated from it, I was afraid would disrupt this entire system and have people feeling certain things. And there was very little effect that I'd created in my mind that, oh, people are going to have a big reaction to this, and people weren't paying attention. And so all of a sudden there was this freedom in having deviated from some of what I'd been convinced I needed to be, that said, oh, you actually are on the right track. And even though it may not make sense to some people, if it makes sense to you and to your truth and to the integrity of who you'd hope to be in 10 years or 20 years from now, the way you hope to model certain things for your kids, the way you'd hope to show up and serve with the light that's been placed in you as the, now mandate to share that light with others. Those kinds of things became more of a North Star than having a title or having a certain kind of status or having something in the world of significance. And when I started turning back into passion, back into curiosity, back into service, you can take those things and they stack in a way that ultimately leads toward like true purpose and real fulfillment. And that then it's just like, once you start running, once you kind of catch that air, it's like, you know, like you're in Tulum. Like,
You're
right?
riding the wave.
Right?
You're like riding the wave.
You're riding the wave, right? So like once you like experience air in Tulum or air in, you know, any place, you're like, oh, I didn't even know that this kind of air existed. Now that you know, it's a thing you can't unknow, and you just get to go. Now, it's not easy necessarily. Like I thought I'm going to make the decision to leave this secure job that I can do well and could have done for the rest of my life, even if it would have come at the expense of me feeling a depth of fulfillment. I thought that making that choice was the hard decision. It was the beginning of a string of hard decisions that I have to make every single day to continue pursuing things that live outside of a place of comfort for the opportunity to continue growing and continue becoming, even as it exposes me to the things that I have the most fear for, insecurity about. But every time I step toward it and face it and deal with criticism or whatever it ends up being, I feel more comfortable doing it the next time because of having proven it didn't kill me. It didn't get me. You know, like I think in our minds, we create these scenarios of what it would feel like to do something that feels connected to listening to intuition or calling, and worry so much about what other people are going to say. And if they don't say it, now all of a sudden you have permission to keep going.
Oh, bro. You talked about like these limitations and these stories. And like, I feel like the stories and the limitations, they're like this box that we create, right? And living outside of the box is like where we get to have more fun and playfulness. But one thing that really resonated with me and what I heard was intuition. And as a man, right, like we are, there's this construct where we forget to lean into our intuition because we need to be, our masculinity needs to show up in such a powerful, prominent way to provide safety or to provide security or to look after our families or whatever the case may be as a man, right? And we've in my experience, I was grown up or I was raised, you know, not just by my parents, but by society in a way that we needed to be macho, right? Like we needed to, there was no emotion, there was no intuition. We needed to fucking know. We just needed to know, right? And, you know, as I really like come back to my center and really balance the masculine and feminine energy, I'm recognizing intuitively the feeling of knowing, not just knowing, but like the feeling. And that to me, I think is a massive shift in what it means to be a man. It's like who we actually are as men. It's like, let's embrace this level of playfulness, this level of wisdom, this level of like, you know, being our inner child and not really thinking that we need to have anything to prove that we are enough, right? Like, yep. Like we have so much to give as like little boys playing, you know, in this playground of our world. And, you know, remembering that for me was really, it was so expansive, right? So this level of intuition, how can men, you know, if they're listening right now, really allow themselves to get out of their heads and back into their heart and recognizes that it's from that place that the wisdom truly comes from. And it's from that place that the intuition is really where they can really believe in themselves. And it's from that place that they get to serve their family, their beloved, their communities. Any suggestions?
Well, so this is going to take a second to explain, but go.
I love it. I'm sorry, but I love it. I'm just like flowing.
So when I think about like, how do I describe narrowing in on purpose or your why or what you're here on this planet for, I've tried to create a little bit of a step-by-step framework of sorts that says first, you have to identify your passion, right? You have to know what you have personal passion for. If you take a step back, it probably requires a bunch of things that you are curious about. You play inside of curiosity until it becomes passion, but you need to find something that you are super passionate about, because if you're not passionate, You will have motivation fatigue. You will not be excited about getting up to do it after, so many months go by. It will not have the same kind of effect on other people. You have to be passionate about it. Okay. That's not about what you asked. The second thing is you have to have some kind of skill. You have to be good in some capacity. And it's not that you have to have that high level skill at the beginning. You can create mastery over time. But in order to really feel a sense of pride, have momentum, and have the kind of impact that you'd hope to have, you actually have to have some skill. So you start with passion, you have some skill. You have to, third thing, is find something that can affect others, have impact on others. If you really want to feel connected to, I am actualizing the reason why I was created and put on this planet, it has to have not just an impact on you, but on other people. And when we talk about masculinity, we talk about what it means to be a man, impacting other people and staying true to the way that society has trained men for decades and centuries to be a certain way makes those two things a bad pairing. You can't have the kind of impact you'd hope to have if you're not willing to be vulnerable, if you're not willing to create something of what I'd like to call an empathy bridge, where in representing your own struggle, someone can see themselves in your story so they feel less alone, so they can see in you talking honestly about the emotions you feel or the way that you're processing the world, that they can see something of themselves in you. If you can take those things and put them together, now you can find a way to actually provide for your family. The fourth thing is provision and creating some sense of security. But the Venn diagram where those things overlap, to me, is where you start to pinpoint how you can get excited on an every single day basis for purpose. But if you can't find a way to connect to other people, it falls apart. And I think the masculinity paradigm historically has made it more difficult for people to connect on a real level because of the mask, because of feeling like they have to be a certain way in order to kind of maintain the dogmatic definition of what it means to be a good man or a real man, a tough guy or whatever else. And if you can release yourself from the prison of that definition and honor the, hey, I struggle like you do, or I am working through this like you, or I failed and I want to teach you a little bit of how I learned through that failure, you now give permission to every single person who you're trying to interact with that's just a part of humanity, that's a normal thing. And by normalizing it, now you can connect in a way that actually affects and affords impact. And so we've got to, I had a hard time, I'll be honest. Like I transitioned out of a corporate environment for 20 plus years. And when I got into this world that I work inside of now, writing my first book was all about storytelling of stuff that I had done that got me in my own way. The coaching that I do or anything I do on social, a lot of times is being really honest and vulnerable about the stuff that I'm still working through in this journey that never ends to become who I'd hope to be at the end of my life. But that being something that deviates from a societal expectation of how men normally act is triggering to someone the first few times they do it. Except as soon as you do it and you find community, you find connection, you find impact, now you start to feel fulfillment. You start to feel purpose, because instead of the mask being a disconnect between who you really are on an every single day basis and who you think you have to be, you are creating integrity between who you really are and how you're presenting yourself. And now people are connecting with you and not some curated version of you. And that's how you get to depth. That's how you get to feel good.
That's the empowering part. That's where it like feels that there is no more wall, right? Like it's like you said, the wall, I believe that the walls that are protect us are also, like you said, the walls that imprison us. And it gives us this opportunity to really step in to, telling our story and, talking about our experiences, which is why it leads us to purpose, which is why I love the Resilient Minds, because when we're resilient, we're willing to step through the fire and come out on the other side, through the veil, so to speak, whatever you want to call it, and really like wake up ourselves to what's possible.
Yeah.
You talk about storytelling, and I think that inside of Walt Disney, some of the greatest stories, right? Like I grew up, watching cartoons from Disney, and it
Yeah.
really brought, like, even now, like, honestly, when I watch like a Disney or Pixar or something, it gives me like this essence of like coming back to my inner child. And so being around that element of creativity, what was it that, keeps people in the, what is it, or what was it, what is it continuously that can keep people inside of that purity and that pureness, that inner wisdom that we get from the moment that we're birthed? Because we really want to be playful, right? Like,
Yeah.
I really believe that.
Well, I mean, I think so much of what, I mean, number one, it's just, assembling the greatest talent on the planet. Like there were, to a person, just the greatest storytellers of all time come together and at the end of my time there, it was Marvel, Pixar, Lucas, and Disney. Like, talk about the greatest brands in the history of intellectual property. They were there. And the storytellers that were living inside of that were just the best. But what made them the best, it kind of goes back to what I was just saying, is that they were storytelling about things that were universally relatable, that were about light and dark, that were about struggle and triumph, that were about the human nature of all of us. And again, if you as a storyteller are able to allow people an opportunity to see themselves in your stories, they will just inevitably, inherently feel connected in a way that goes super deep, that triggers emotion, that makes them want to see how the story ends, that makes them want to advocate and become a mouthpiece on behalf of the story once they've seen it to their friends. Oh my God, this is so good. You have to see this and watch this. And so I think if you want to take a cue in any way for like, well, how do we take what they do and apply it in our lives? Again, the more that you can, no matter what you do, right? Like, you don't have to be an author. You don't have to be someone who's working inside of a business like I am. You could be leading a small team inside of a startup. You as a leader having a conversation that allows people to appreciate that, hey, as we scale, I'm also going through these things that I am trying to solve, and we're going to solve them together, but normalizing that these problems happen in a way that makes people feel seen and also has them appreciating that there's a little bit of normalness in the way that they might be processing the disruption of a quarantined year, or the challenges of the headwinds inside of the competitive landscape that you're ultimately working inside of. Just gives permission for it to be okay, and in that permission invites people to come to the table with creativity and innovation for solutions, because they feel like there's permission to do it. So, the Disney experience was just one of the most wild in the world. And I also had a very interesting role relative to their creativity, because as the person who was leading a sales team, I had more of an analytical approach to how I might take their creative interpretation of story and sell it to the people inside the movie theater, exhibition space, so that I could extract the greatest value in deals or keep the movies in theaters for the longest period of time. And so some of my conversations with the greatest creatives ever were about me taking fact or analysis and trying to present it as a reason why a poster ought to include this, or why the way that their creative interpretation may be received by an exhibitor, or the way that we were screening it to audiences early. And it's a very interesting dance, because
Absolutely.
Any creative isn't interested necessarily in hearing what the commercial guy has to say. No. And yet there was an important yin yang of how can I coexist with you in a way that's super supportive and applauds every ounce of what you've done, and also offer a perspective that our customers are saying or that our audiences are saying, so that we can make the smartest decisions about where we put the movie from a calendar perspective, or how we market the movie, or how we change something inside of not maybe the film, but the way that we're using the assets of the film to position it to the audience. So it was a fun dance for sure.
That is a dance and a bridge and everything in between so beautifully, because the completely unaware perspective, uses a logical mind, right? Because they're completely unaware, right? They don't even tap into the level of emotion until you block through that, get through those levels of fact. So I am totally, admiring a lot of this work that you've done, because I understand how deep you need to really go in your own attunements, and then all the market research that you need to do to really understand people's language and the way they connect, where they could build up like a level of, not understanding, to get them to this place where they get curious and inspired. And having that beautiful dance come together, I think is the greatest gift that any integrator, creator, dance can happen, is because now we're able to like really unify a process where these ideas become reality and integrated into the world. And I think that is what the divine really wants us to do. That's what like our creator wants us to do, is like, all these ideas that we create, in our minds, how can we manifest them into this 3D perspective? And so you being this like bridge was it is extremely powerful. And how you cultivated that, now moving into, doing all of this on your own, and the way that you're like building your business, and how it's been evolved over the years. How has that transpired? Because you talked about, you worked with Rachel, you guys were working together for a while. And I remember, I think it was a year almost now, where I saw a post where you guys shared like vulnerably about like the beautiful separation and the connection that you guys had, and you will continue to have in business. And for me, that was like inspiring, because that is a whole new level of vulnerability that I think couples don't, it's not common.
Yeah.
And you guys both being on this perspective of like, being seen, being heard, being understood, was an opportunity for you guys to connect back to your audience in a really powerful way. Do you want to touch on that specific experience and how it really manifested?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is we had just an amazing marriage, and yet there were 1,000 little things that just kind of came in between who we were when we met. When she was 19, I'm 27. Like we were young people that became older people, and in what just inevitably became us growing apart, our friendship was always there, and the things that you'd hope for in marriage were something that just wasn't necessarily still part of the picture. And so our ambition in the timing of our divorce was, we're going to still be friends. We're still going to be great co-parents. We're still going to love on these kids, and we're going to still try and work on this business in some capacity. And I will be honest, like that was an idea that we absolutely 100% had at the time. And it was harder in practice than it was in reality, because obviously, man, it's a hard thing to transition out of relationship. And so there was a window of time where I was still doing some coaching inside of, or some, things inside of the app that she has. And after a certain point of time, it was, hey, you know what? I want to maintain our friendship. I want to maintain this co-parenting relationship. But I think for me, this is a place where a boundary is important, so that I can transition into and start working on other things. Doesn't mean I'm not going to root for her to be successful in whatever she ends up doing, and hope that team, has success as well. But there was, that the very beginning window, we gave it our best to try and see if we couldn't still be supportive of each other inside of that creative space. And ultimately, it was a thing that was not going to be productive for the kind of closure that was necessary at the end of a marriage. And so we are, we're in a good place now. And I think and we've been in a good place, but I think it's been somewhat of an evolution over time, because you don't know how you will experience the emotions of a transition until you're in the midst of it. And then you've got to make smart choices that protect your peace, that protect your ability to move forward, that, allow you to continue to do what you believe to be your calling and purpose on this planet. And so I haven't, to be honest, I haven't been working in the business now for quite a length of time. And it doesn't change the fact that I'm still like, I want nothing but the best for her. I want her to be successful, and I want that team to succeed. And I'm also really excited about the stuff that I'm working on.
Absolutely. And you created boundaries, which I love that word, because I think that's important to honor. And I literally was having a conversation the other day, is like, if we're out of integrity and we're not building boundaries, it's because we're looking to please. And, I was in a relationship where I was doing a lot of the things behind the scenes, and I just felt super unfulfilled. Like I was just like doing a lot of like things that like inspired me, but I wanted to like do things that were more in my own creative ability to like step in front and like stop asking for permission. And I realized the same way, it was like, it wasn't aligned with my true calling, my true purpose. And I had to not only, for me, it was not only the business disintegrated, but like our relationship did, of course. And this was already almost a couple years ago. But it was something that for me helped me realize like how important it is to stay in integrity and stop pleasing. And I think that especially like as men, we have this like idea that we need to support and serve, right? So it was like I wanted to support and serve, but it was at the expense of my own like identity. And there was this like back and forth. And so I really, I think that having that boundary is really something that it's important, whether whether you're working with your spouse or not. It was for me just important to like make sure that you're in there without having to please, right? Be honest to yourself and then to your partner. Do you agree?
Well, I think part of it too, and I don't know if this will resonate with anyone, but when this transition was happening, I anticipated that I would be married for the rest of my life, but also work inside of this business for the rest of my life. And so the idea of having both my personal and professional future now with this blank canvas, this blank piece of paper, it was way more terrifying than it was exhilarating at the beginning of the journey. And so I think holding on to things in the shorter term is about somewhat of a kind of a scarcity moment where you're like, oh, I don't know if I can, or I don't know what it looks like. I'm not sure how to. So I'm going to stay clinging to this thing that I know.
I love that perspective. Wow.
Right. And so when I was able to actually confront the things that I was afraid of in having to fill out that blank piece of paper, it allowed me to engineer the imagination necessary to create a vision for my future that was as or more beautiful than what I previously was looking at as what I thought the rest of my life was going to look like.
Wow.
And once I could make that pivot, then it was like, oh, move away from scarcity, man. There's so much abundance in what's coming. I feel so excited for what next looks like now that I can actually see it. But there are times, right? The rug gets pulled out. I wasn't expecting that we were going to get divorced, and it happened in a pretty short window of time. We hadn't really had a lot of conversation about it. And so that beginning fog, anytime your world changes, whatever it might be, it could be diagnosis, you could be laid off, COVID shows up, whatever it is, that beginning fog will likely have you clinging to things that are familiar that because there's security or safety or something in that just satisfies some basic need that we all have. But if you can address why you're afraid of contemplating something different, what it is, and I ended up making this list of 46 things that I was afraid of to try and identify which of the things I was afraid of were real or not, because I think most of them, 80%, were just, false evidence appearing real, kind of conjured fear. But the 20% that was real, then it was like, okay, how do you make a plan to address this fear, brother? Like it's real fear. You got to face this fear. How can you face it so that you can now start making a plan to move forward? That first step was such a linchpin in just catalyzing imagination that now all of a sudden I was like, oh, I can dream again. I can create these new dreams for my life that I am in control of. I get to show up and do the work to actually take steps every day to making this vision of who I'd hope to become and the kind of life and world I want to live inside of a reality. Let's go. Let's go. Right. Yes. And by the way, though, like that was where, again, it was still exhilarating and terrifying, but it was just less terrifying and more exhilarating on an every single day basis. And it also happens to, like be in a season where I was holding hope and grief, right? And I think like for all of us, like there's something just so human about the duality of both that you're rarely in life going to just exclusively be on like a high without something that, sits inside of the low. And it's okay. Like it's like honor the fact that both exist. I think that it's in that duality that growth happens, because if you're only experiencing the high, you're probably not pushing yourself into something that makes you uncomfortable, that triggers your fear, that breaks down the muscle, that all the things, right? And so I actually think you have to live inside that space of that duality if you're really going to be feeling something that makes you become, instead of staying connected to or kind of, status quo. I really do believe you're either growing or dying. I don't think that there is like a treading water version. Like either you're growing or you're dying. And of course, everyone will say, oh, well, then I want to grow. Okay, awesome. Then you got to do some things that make you uncomfortable. You got to be a little bit afraid and do it anyway. And if you can hold that power of both, that you can be both hopeful and grieve, you can be, excited and terrified.
Fantastic. Both of them, right? Because the contrast is so freaking important, right? Like that's what gives us the gift of, like you're saying, is like seeing the highs. And I just want to like acknowledge your vulnerability and the beauty, right? Because like this is vulnerable what you're sharing, man. Like thank you. I'm really honored. I'm very grateful, because like that it's so beautiful to see somebody that, from the public side, they've had this great success, worked at Walt Disney, president, Rachel Hollis, right? Like everybody is growing. And now it's like, there's still an element. It doesn't matter how much perceived abundance that people will see. There is still an element that we can stop and drop into a scarcity. And there's always a new step. It doesn't matter where you are in your life. It doesn't matter what your accolades are. It doesn't matter, we are human at the end of the day, and we still have the same doubts, fears, insecurities, and we can all relate in resonance with one another, because that is what makes us so unified, so connected, so beautiful in this like school earth and this family of like humanity, where we get to like serve each other by like loving on each other, just like loving on each other, like being in our hearts and supporting one another's gifts, right? Like, so you sharing that, brother, it's so powerful to see. And for anybody that's listening, please understand, like, this is the beauty of life. There's peaks and valleys, and we get to like learn from each other. It doesn't matter what point you're at. You can always break through and you can always fall down, but the choice is ours. The choice is ours.
Yeah. I came through this last year at the beginning of, I guess it was the end of 19. I made this declaration at our holiday party that I was going to have my best year ever in 2020. I was going to be turning 45. I'm sitting at this DJ booth at this small venue that we'd brought our team together in. And I was like, get ready, y'all. I'm about to have the best year of my life. Said it out loud publicly. At the time, because I was going to be a first-time author and a first-time coach and a first-time podcast, I was like a handful of things that I was moving from being inside the business to more outside, out front, as a person who was going to be teaching and having conversations, leaning into vulnerability, all that kind of stuff. I was feeling a little bit unmoored, like, oh man, I've pushed myself out of this harbor. I am not yet acclimated to the rockiness of the waves. but I still was like, you know what? I'm going to go. I'm going to have this fantastic year. And a year later, I can tell you with 100% certainty, I had the absolute 100% best year of my life. And it also happened to be absolutely 100% the worst year of my life. And the idea that you can have both the best and worst is something that I would have never contemplated, but I am in the best shape and feel so connected to the positive optimism of my future, and am in such great relationship with my kids and closer to my creator, and have created friendships and relationships that never existed if not for the circumstances that I went through. And I said it earlier, but I didn't have the best year of my life because I was able to weather the storms. I didn't have it in spite of these things that happened. I had it because of, right? I found myself having my best year because of the way that I was tested, because of the way that the headwinds thrown my way ultimately had to have me ask myself the question, are you going to stay down or get back up? And when adversity ends up coming your way, it's not a question of if, it's when you're going to be asked that same question. All right, like life is going to inevitably suck at certain points. And when it does, is there a way for you to ask, like, what is it? What is the universe? What is God? What is this crappy thing I don't deserve trying to teach me? Or how is it trying to help me grow? Is it trying to force me to my knees to be in closer relationship with God? Is it trying to force me into community and create stronger connection in community? Is it trying to force me to deal with some of my coping mechanisms? Is it trying to, whatever it might be? And if you can, really be honest and do a self-assessment of like, what is this for? Is it for me instead of happening to me? There is a way, and it doesn't mean that, by the way, you shouldn't be angry at times, or that you shouldn't like shake your hand at like, this isn't fair. I agree, but like fairness is a construct that the universe doesn't necessarily abide by. And so we inevitably have to choose. Are we going to, when unfair things happen, are we going to stay down or get back up? There's plenty of days, like I had a streak like Cal Ripken of crying in the midst of 2020. Trust me, I shed many tears. And yet those tears, a lot of times, were some of the healthiest and most cathartic moments of my journey, because I was able to really invite a conversation with my sadness and my emotions in a way that I hadn't inventoried in forever, and understanding why I felt what I did and who I am at my core was a product of the conditions that I was going through. And as much as I sat there at the beginning of the year saying, I'm gonna have my best year yet, I did not get to dictate the conditions that would afford me that best year. And unfortunately, I wish I could tell you it was otherwise. None of us do, right? Like none of us get a choice in the kind of conditions that are going to come. We only get a choice in how we react to and make meaning out of the conditions that we are presented with.
Oh, bro. It's like having the what and the why being so powerful, the how and the who always show up. And it's like recognizing that everything is for us, like you're saying, is such a gift. And those lessons, how we decipher them, like you said, we got to like try to like see the contrast and recognize the beauty of it all. And our mind sometimes takes over, but like dropping into the heart and allowing that, like, this is meant to be the way that it is. This is why I'm growing. I'm learning where part of this is really allowing me to manifest greatness from this experience so that I can help others in the future. So brother, like I am super excited to, to really connect further, deeper. I'm certain we'll spend more time. I'll have you back on the show at some point. But if there's anybody that, wants to reach out, find out more information about what you're up to, connect with you, what is the best way that somebody can reach out, be inspired, if they're inspired today, anything that you can share, any wisdom, any connection?
Right on. Well, I mean, I spend a decent amount of time on social, so you're welcome to follow me at Mr. Dave Hollis on Instagram or Dave Hollis on Facebook. I do coaching inside of a rad community. It's kind of like a masterclass kind of a setting on something called Growth Day, growthday.com/Hollis. Once a month, I go live, but there are 12 other teachers that are going live every Tuesday and Thursday. Amazing coaches, and for like what you get for your money. amazing value. And then you mentioned it. I have this podcast on Thursdays called Rise Together, where my intention is to bring people who have had different life experiences to the table and just introduce you. Hope is that there may be this empathy bridge that is created between their experience and something in your life, so that you might see a little bit of how someone else has had to go through and experience things that maybe you haven't, soften maybe a little bit of the harder edges of your heart, and connect you a little bit more to humanity at large. So check that out as well.
Beautiful. And I'll make sure that I have those links in the comments, or sorry, in the show notes. And last question. If you had 3 days left to live, what would you do?
If I had 3 days left to live, I would spend one day by myself, first day. And in that, I would just try and become as peace-filled as possible for all of what my life has meant, collect my thoughts, spend time with God, just really release anything that might still exist so that I can transition in as light and beautiful a way as possible. Day 2, I'm gonna spend with my most immediate and most important humans. So my kids, just spending as much time. I mean, I think I'd probably break the day into one-on-one time with each of them before we all did something together. But just making sure that they knew, God, everything's going to be great. And I would try and impart as much as I possibly could, wisdom-wise on each of them, but also try to just have some fun. And then the last day, I'd get my family. I'd try to have as big a party as possible, every and anyone who has been meaningful in my life. At the end of time, I think about whether it's, I've talked about a milestone birthday party. How might people raise a glass at my 60th? How might people eulogize me at my funeral? Like, the idea of the way that you've had an ability to impact people in your life is the reason we're here, for so many reasons. And to be able to assemble as many people that I have had an opportunity to impact and celebrate a life well lived, to challenge them to go around and raise some glasses, to allow me to go around to each of them and represent what impact and meaning they've had in my own life. Like, that would be the most beautiful send-off, to just like connect in kind of, in a space like that. Beautiful, brother.
That was amazing. Honestly, thank you so much for coming on. I'm really grateful for your time. This was really special. Do you have any last kind of things that you want to just share? Any last off hurrah?
Well, I'll finish up with my tattoo. I've got this tattoo here. It's a John Shedd quote. It's been my mantra for the last 3 years. It says, "A ship in harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are built for." I have just been on this mission to try every day, like I started the conversation, to get a step closer to honoring the intention of my creator. Part of that is acknowledging that I was built for the seas that exist beyond the harbor of safety, of certainty, of security, in that's where growth happens. And as much as it is uncomfortable and the swells come and the wind blows and whatever else, I am built for this. And I want to encourage you as a listener to believe that you were built for this too. Because if you are in any way feeling stuck or wondering, why isn't there more in this life of mine? It may in fact be that you are still docked at a harbor that eliminates the possibility for a depth of purpose or fulfillment. And it may in fact be time to leave the harbor. The first step is believing that you were built to handle the waves that exist beyond the jetty.
Yes.
So believe it.
Oh, thank you, my friend. Again, check out Mr. Dave Hollis on Instagram, Dave Hollis on Facebook. So until next time, guys, thank you. Much love.